Hello and welcome to episode 5 of Art Journal with Iris. I am yet again working in a different journal because I want to show you different ways of journaling in different kind of formats. So this is a very small journal. The pages are about 15 by 15 centimeters, I think. It's really a really good format for journaling quickly. So it's a small square journal, and I am nearly finished in it, which is very exciting. Here I am using a red mechanical pencil to just do some scribbly journaling. So this journaling is all going to get covered, but that's kind of the idea. So some of it might peek out in later layers, but I don't know that in advance, so I'm definitely not creating it to be seen. I am doing it for texture, but mostly to give myself a place to express myself and to just have a little place for journaling, to really kind of dump my thoughts and feelings without that kind of self-judgment, because knowing that I'm going to cover it up, I find that we can still filter ourselves even when we know that nobody else is going to read something, even if we know that it just stays in existence, so like in a regular diary. So that's why I love this technique as a first layer, because it really leaves you free to express anything without judgment. So once that first scribbly page is done, I then start adding some supplies on top. So this is a water-soluble marker, and I just scribble some on top and start adding some water to it to fan it out. This layer, this stage, is really about just getting the hand moving. There isn't really a specific purpose to it. So I'm just playing with watercolors. I am adding the watercolors not all over, so it's not like a wash on the whole page. It's just focusing on a specific area, and that is something that I really like to do because it creates interest. It creates somewhere for the eye to go. Here I'm adding a neutral color in a heavy body acrylic, and that's again something that I love doing, where I pay attention to the contrast and the kind of the value of the different paint colors, so that not everything is really samey. And one trick that you can do to find out whether you've got enough contrast in your pieces is by turning it to black and white in, like, an app on your phone or something. Take a picture and turn it to black and white, and then see if everything is the same color gray, it means that you haven't got a lot of contrast. So I'm moving on now to drawing in a face. I am using my Stabilo All pencil, which I used to be addicted to, and now I haven't used it for years, so I thought I would go back to it and have a little go with it. So the Stabilo All, it is a pencil that can write on almost anything, and it is water soluble, and when you activate it with water, you get some really nice dark lines, and I really like that. So I am adding a regular eye, like a whimsical regular eye, and then also a kind of weird big eye that you might have seen in some of my recent art. What I'm also showing you in this video is this is a slightly shorter video than what I usually do, and that's because this art session was actually very short, and that is something that I love doing. I love sometimes just kind of coming in, sitting down for, I don't know, like half an hour, 45 minutes, and making something really quick, like not thinking too much about it, just moving, keep moving, and then finishing something really quick. And it's very satisfying, obviously, to finish something, and it's also kind of like trains you not to think too much about your decisions and not to kind of get stuck in, oh, what am I gonna do? So I'm using a water brush here, and I am activating all of those really nice black lines, and I'm fanning out the additional color that's left on the brush a little bit to kind of create a very subtle shading. I try and obscure like the top line that was a guideline for the head, but I don't necessarily want to keep it in. And as you can see, I'm going back and forth between that Stabilo All and the water brush, just to kind of put in those extra lines that I want there. That was adding in a little neck, and then adding a bit of shading. I've dried all the water now, and I'm coming in with a red Molotov marker. I don't know how to pronounce that. Molotov, whatever. And I am, instead of doing a mouth, I'm doing a cross, because that's just what I felt like. And that is, to me, what art journaling and junk journaling is all about. It is about doing on that page, in that journal, exactly what you feel like doing and expressing exactly what you want to express, even if it's a bit weird, or, you know, if you worry about what people might think. Here I'm coming in with my staple purple watercolor for the hair, and I do have a few more suggestions that you left on in the comments of different hair colors that I can use, so they will be coming up in next episodes. But for now, here we're back to my trusty purple watercolors. And I'm coming in with some white acrylics now, just to reinforce some of the places in the face that I want to stay white. So obviously I want that eye to be pretty white, because it will provide a really nice focus point. And other highlights will go under the eye, the nose bridge, the forehead, the nose, and like above the eyes. I'm not very precise about these things. As you can see, the kind of stuff that I paint is very whimsical. It's not realistic. I kind of just put the highlights where they kind of feel right. Here I'm coming in with some shading on the face with some of my watercolors. This is a kind of peachy color. And I tend to just go all over, avoiding those areas a little bit where I put the white, but even if I go over them, I can always bring the white back, the highlights, at a later stage. So I don't worry too much about what I'm doing. I think that is something that is true for every single layer. I try to not get too worried about covering something over or doing something quote unquote wrong, because I kind of trust that I can come back and reinsert those things that I enjoyed before. So here I have moved on to some colored pencils, and I'm reinforcing those lines. I filled in the iris with a kind of a turquoise, and here I'm adding some dark blue to the line work, and kind of all over the face as well, because I love doing that. It gives a real nice texture, that pencil texture. And here I am adding a kind of an orangey color as shading, and you can see that immediately it makes the face pop a lot more by having those that shading at the edges is something different from the kind of the skin tone that I used. Here I'm using an applicator bottle that you have probably seen in my art a bit more often, because I really like these scribbly lines, and it's just so expressive and just an easy touch. Here I am preparing some red ink. That's Liquitex acrylic ink in red, and I am using a very junky brush. It's like very damaged. It's a thin brush that has been quite damaged, and I'm using it to make very raw, imperfect lettering. So you can even, like, with a brush that you've got, you can actually cut some of the hairs out of it, just so that it becomes really bristly and like junky, and so you don't have as much control. And that's one of my tricks. I like writing that N the wrong way around, because it looks kind of childish and it looks kind of grungy. And I am using up the leftover ink by kind of lightly adding some scribbly lines, grungy, scribbly, dry lines, and going over those bits where I added red before in the painting. So that is something that I tend to do, where I reinforce things at a later stage with a different supply, either in the same color or in a different color, and it just adds to that layering up of kind of complex textures. Here I've dried the page really thoroughly, and then I'm coming in with clear gesso and adding it over the whole page so that I have got a really nice textured layer to work on, and so that everything underneath is protected. I am using a key card to apply this because that way I can kind of like scrape over the surface without agitating the layers underneath too much, because obviously anything that's water soluble will smudge if you agitate it too much. And now with that layer of clear gesso really nice and dry, I can come in with my colored pencils and have a really nice surface to work on, because that surface takes colored pencils so well, and it really, not just the color, but also the texture really comes through. And at that point, you actually have to start being a little bit more sparing with your application of colored pencils, because it really takes it so well. So again, you can see I am reinforcing things that were there before. So here I'm coming in with a white colored pencil on the eye where everything was already white before. It just adds that texture and that grungy feeling of the colored pencil. And I'm coming in now with a white acrylic to reinforce those highlights, but here I'm doing it with a slightly smaller brush this time, so I've got a bit more control. So that is something that I tend to do, and I think that's just like a very common painting technique, that you might start with really broad strokes to kind of get the basics in, and then as you get towards the end and the finishing touches, you go smaller and smaller, so you go to the supplies where you have more and more control with. Adding some highlights, adding the eye whites and then some highlights to the eye, because that really helps the eye pop. Here I am coming in with some pink for the cheeks. So sometimes I draw out the cheeks with an outline, and sometimes I don't, and I just add some color. There's different ways of kind of achieving the similar things, and I think that I would call that like part of my style, where there's a lot of similarities between pieces, and then there's also some differences, and yet you can kind of like look at the different pieces and you'd be like, okay, no, you can see that I created them, that it's my style. And that's kind of something that you develop over time, but there's some kind of tips and tricks that you can use that help kind of create a cohesive whole from one piece to the next. Here I am coming in with a technique that you probably have seen me use before, which is using watercolors in Daniel Smith Lunar Black, and I use this as an outline on the edges of the page, because when it dries not so black as it is when it's wet. It actually gives a really nice grungy texture, and you'll see I am fanning it out so that you don't get really stark lines. Now, as a finishing touch, I am adding some white acrylic with a key card and just tapping the card onto the page to get some kind of grungy lines. That is a technique I actually haven't used for a long time, but it's really nice. It's very subtle, very grungy, and it's a really nice finishing touch. Although you could also do it at the start of a page. So we're getting up to the end of this artwork, and I hope that this has kind of shown you that you can do a lot and make a really nice finished page in not very long. I hope you enjoyed the video. If you liked it, please give it a thumbs up, leave a comment, and subscribe if you haven't done so, and I will see you in the next one. Thank you for watching. Bye!